As I sit typing this, the cat has just come over to me. He's been fed, he can get out if he needs to, but he decided to come over to me anyway, and I find we're both just looking at each other. This disconnected connection has always fascinated me. If we see someone we know, we recognize them visually, but animals don't seem to do that. You could maybe think that they recognize other members of their own species that way, but there's a strong feeling that an animal will know you, as we might understand as a spirit, an energy rather than a logical, mathematical facial recognition program. To me, this is essentially what we've been deprived of, where for instance on occasions we've all had a sense that someone's looking at us, and when we turn around sure enough they are. This then is at the heart of everything, where although not wishing to wander into the God-creator debate, it has to be faced as a way of comprehending this apparent disconnect we experience, and separates us from the whole. The result is that we all go through life as, not just separate bodies as individuals, but as separate souls, like abandoned spirits lost at sea. Before enlarging on my next assertion, I fully admit to being a hypocrite, and not practicing what I'd preach, which is why I don't preach it. For a long time now I've wondered at why we, as humans, eat meat. How is it that in order to be carnivores we need first to prepare it in our external stomach, a frying pan? The main argument I have though is the moral one. I need everyone professing to believe that we are truly carnivorous to ask yourself deep questions, such as, are you defending its practice purely because you like the taste? I remember watching a podcast, where the host described a farm where the man turned up to slaughter the animals. The look of guilt on his face was palpable, and the attempts at sanitizing this was written all over his body language, as he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The clincher for me was when a vegan friend showed me a comparison of anatomical features of specific dietary groups, where things like jaws and teeth, along with digestive tracts and such, were grouped together into frugivore, carnivore, herbivore and omnivore. I can tell you now that we're herbivores, whether you like it or not. This then raises disturbing questions as to why we took the practice up, and in my opinion it's a satanic perversion, where ultimately our controllers want us to eat ourselves. More and more evidence is beginning to manifest itself regarding the true nature of illness, and how another deception has supplemented the control over us, namely that of germ theory. As with so much of our received teaching, most people are unaware that not one virus has ever been isolated or purified. What I mean by this is, certain protocols have been devised by controlling institutions that make assumptions when calculating the origins, by means of in silico modeling, of outbreaks of supposed diseases. In the modern era, these forecasts are based largely on computer simulations, having been pre-programmed with assumptions decided by a committee of supposed learned minds. Germ theory had originally been proposed by Louis Pasteur, in which a universe of microorganisms populate and interact with our biological makeup, and significantly was seized upon by John D. Rockefeller in the promotion of synthetic health treatments. In hindsight, we can now see that this enabled the formation of the pharmaceutical industry, allowing a mechanism to introduce toxins into the environment. What is never spoken of in the mainstream is Pasteur's admission, at the end of his life, that he dismissed germ theory entirely. It appears that the reason we develop illnesses is to do with our body's natural detox cycle, where poisons are occasionally purged from our bodies, manifesting things like high temperatures, rashes and the like. What the health services do is essentially divide patients into categories of symptoms. Multiple people could have been poisoned by the same thing, but their systems may purge these poisons in different ways, so that for instance 3 people who were affected by fluoridation in the water may manifest different methods to detox. One develops an unusual skin rash, another has a high temperature, and another vomiting. These symptoms are categorized and given a title, whereby synthetic treatments are prescribed to treat those symptoms. The fact of the matter is that they were deviously poisoned, and then had the blame put on these nasty little bugs, whereupon the army of doctors prescribe pharmaceutical responses based on their Rockefeller training principles. The main resource to study in order to understand this is Dawn Lester and David Parker's groundbreaking work What Really Makes You Ill. If pharmaceuticals have been recently introduced to adversely affect our health, then the thing we're actively discouraged from doing is eating raw foods. For some time we've been indoctrinated with the idea that nasty bacteria are everywhere, and that chemicals have to be introduced into the food chain and our environment for our own good. If everything we're told is the opposite of the truth, and it seems it is, then eating food in its most natural state is an obvious panacea. If we think of the mysterious previous cultures, and their buildings that have been repurposed as churches and cathedrals, we can see curious connections with sound and frequency techniques as we'd understand them today. The windows that are now largely adorned with stained glass are strangely similar to the cymatic patterns produced when sand or salt is scattered onto a vibrating membrane and activated at varying frequencies. This leads many researchers to conclude that these buildings were actually healing centers, with a pipe organ as an integral part of the architecture. There seems to be an intrinsic connection to our general health and frequency, whereby the individual organs within us resonate at particular frequencies, and have a symbiotic relationship with both ourselves and others around us. Many of us will be aware of the phenomenon of a couple who've lived together for years, and then one dies, with the other succumbing to death shortly afterwards. Along with the possible connection to the phenomenon of contagion, this leads me to believe that the harmonious bond of couples being disconnected is responsible for dying of a broken heart. It would appear that the energy technologies handed down to us are pseudo-energy techniques. What I mean by this is that so-called fossil fuels aren't the result of decayed organisms, and consequently a disappearing commodity, but rather are a primitive alternative designed to give us limited energy under their control. The true nature of powering our world seems to be hidden inside the electrical laws we're taught, where we're only given part of the story. How many times have we looked at an aerial view of a city and noticed the similarity to an electrical circuit board? There are even historic churches mimicking exactly a circuit board pattern on the main entrance floor. Our bodies seem to have a natural capacity to heal themselves when not poisoned or damaged, and these healing technologies using frequencies, such as Tesla machines, seem to allow the body to recognize damage and galvanize itself to fixing the problem. In our world today we see the individual characters responsible for orchestrating our enslavement, and obvious figures are the likes of Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates, but these obviously aren't the originators of this enslavement plan. When we look into the darkest corners of how we've been manipulated, we find the disturbing phenomenon of satanic ritual abuse, SRA, with its attendant uses of adrenochrome. For those of you unfamiliar with what this is, adrenalized blood is believed to have properties analogous to a fountain of youth, and the purest forms are extracted from young children under extremes of terror and suffering. Among the Hollywood and political elite we see people of extreme age who seem to be unexpectedly young-looking, and it doesn't take a deep imagination to connect the dots. There also seems to be a significance given to transsexual, hermaphroditic people that has echoes in the darker sides of mythology, and we're discovering on a daily basis celebrities that were given to us as one gender but were actually born another. We mentioned earlier the family bloodline ties among the presidents of the USA, and these bloodline families seem to play a major role, along with other weak, compliant non-bloodline aspirants, in the selection of puppets employed by this ruling cult to deceive us. I draw your attention to the likes of Matt Hancock and Keir Starmer, where anyone believing for a second that these pathetic village idiots were co-authors of this mind-boggling deception are themselves being deceived. In other areas of public life, however, we find that the surnames of household names, like news anchors or celebrities, have been changed to hide their relationship to major criminal families, such as the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, or military assets are used along with their children in major programs. Dave McGowan wrote a fascinating book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, that will shock anyone believing that their favorite musician or band was simply a talented bunch who got lucky breaks in the industry. The stark truth is that the entire hippie movement was a fabrication to influence societies internationally towards decentralizing the family unit and distracting the public from government policies and activities, introducing mind control techniques supplemented by hallucinogenics. The etymology of our entire culture is eye-opening, where the wording of everyday usage is covertly telling you exactly what this evil cult is perpetrating. For instance, the wood of the holly tree is historically sourced for making a wand to cast spells, and the word history itself actually tells you his story. This then comprises the all-encompassing brainwashing and mind control, with its attendant mockery, putting in our faces exactly what this evil cult is doing. In the same way that we rely on official institutions to validate his story for anything further than about 100 years ago, we also have to realize that the extent to what we receive as reality is almost entirely what we are given by institutions and media outlets. As mentioned earlier with the 1986 Challenger disaster, this reality seems to be completely fabricated. What I mean by this is that every major news item is staged, with these controlled assets positioned into place by the corporations that ultimately wield this power of control. For any of you who've seen an outtake from BBC News, where a so-called war correspondent is caught acting, you all know what I mean. A prostrate, frightened journalist in a helmet and bulletproof vest gasps at how dangerous this war-torn city is, and in the background an old woman wanders by with her shopping bags looking at him perplexed. This then begs a significant question: could humans actually achieve all this? With this in mind, we move to possibly the most controversial part of our revelations, where although we can be pretty sure of the historical events, the story behind them is dubious to say the least. In contemporary history we have two characters whose names are synonymous with dictatorial tyranny, Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, but let's just reflect on their time in the spotlight. Gaddafi was born of a poor family in Libya, and rose through the military, coming to a position of authority and deposing the Western-backed monarchy in 1969. Saddam, also of common stock and rising through the military, nationalized the Iraqi oil outlets, and both withdrew from the international Rothschild bankster system. Can you see where this is heading? You can research these two men independently, and you'll find, particularly with Gaddafi, that he sacrificed much for Libyans and their freedom and quality of life. This too makes me doubt the official narrative regarding other so-called dictators like Idi Amin. As we move into 2025, it seems as if challenges from the likes of Gaddafi disappeared in 2011, and you have to ask if there's any possibility left of any world leaders challenging this new world order. Well, let me take you back to earlier in the 20th century, and reopen the history books on someone all of us need to reassess,